Here we are, for Pete's sake.
Paul VI taught me the dignity of the papacy, Charlotte. He was a pope who was still being carried around on something called a sedia gestatoria.
Right.
Now, it's not a rude word. You can say it to your grandmother. A sedia gestatoria in Latin means it's literally the chair from which you gesticulate.
Right.
That sounds rude, actually.
That I wouldn't say to my grandmother.
Then we can cut this in post.
Forget this. Yeah. Well, thank you again for tuning in to the first episode of Rome Reports. And Sean, thank you for being on the first podcast from Rome Reports. Here we are, for Pete's sake. My goodness, it's been a long time coming. You and I did our keys a while ago, and that was just a little bit of a sneak peek. But we're happy to be here and getting it started. Thank you for sitting down with us.
Well, even that title is a variation on lots of themes, isn't it? I mean, we started with For Heaven's Sake, and we went through For Goodness Sake, and now it's ended up being For Pete's Sake, which does sort of prompt the question, so which of us is Pete?
I know. And for all intents and purposes, we both are. And then we'll just switch, throughout the entire episode. So if either one of us refers to each other as Pete, I think we're fine.
But actually, it's cute because we are here in the Vatican. And it's kind of important to stress that we really are physically very, very close to Vatican City and therefore close to the throne. Yeah. Well, the burial site of Saint Peter and of course the successor of Peter. So
for all intents and purposes, Pope Leo is Pete.
There you go. All right.
He's in the room with us now.
You did email him and check
I know,
that, did you?
But he said he was busy. I don't know with what. Very confused.
I'm sure he is. But there you go, for Pete's sake. And it's kind of an exclamation, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, so for Pete's sake, why did you invite me to begin with,
Well, but it's fantastic because you have so much experience. I mean, I'm fresh off the boat here. I mean, quite literally. But how many years have you been doing this? 40 million?
Round numbers. We like round numbers. When you get to my age, you kind of round things out. So about half a century. Wow. So your parents weren't even born yet, probably when I started working in the Vatican. Yeah.
And
the world was still in black and white when I started.
I was going to say, you didn't even have, you were just radio, was it?
Well, that was all there was. There was no Vatican television at that time. And 50 years ago, even Italian state television, this is not a joke, was still broadcasting in black and white. It went to color in the late 1970s.
Amazing. So how did you get into it? How did it start?
Into what?
Into media, into the radio world.
Into media, into radio. So
how old were you then?
So, age, let's leave age out of this. Age has nothing to do with it. Yeah, exactly. Never ask a gentleman his age. So,
does this bring back memories? This right here?
Of sitting here? Yes. This is, okay, so you got me. Yeah. This is my first love. Yeah. I have a face made for radio.
Yeah. No.
Yes, I do. It's you can make up whatever you want by just listening to the voice. Television takes away the gloss, it takes away the mystique and the mystery and all the rest. And that's how I did. I was 5.5 years of age, Charlotte. So here's this little boy. Try to imagine him. He was so cute. He had curly blonde hair, and he's brought into this radio studio because his daddy has a friend who owns a radio, and they need a little boy's voice for a chocolate commercial.
No kidding.
And here's it, and it's. So if you've done psychology, I mean, everybody does a bit of psychology nowadays. Right, we can't really live without psychology. So if you know a bit of psychology, it's called a cognitive experience. It's your first visual, sensorial, it's something you remember, it's embedded in your brain. And it's one of my very, very first cognitive experiences is standing on a chair in a radio studio, because I'm so tiny they've brought the microphone down as far as they can. It's still not low enough. So I'm standing on the chair and I'm 5, so I can't read yet. So there's a lady over here feeding me the lines. And there's something about the smell of the soundproofing and the radio and the fact, I think, that I have everyone's attention. So I'm feeling very, very important, you see. And I'm standing on a chair, so I'm looking down on everybody. And everybody's being very nice to me. And all I have to do is repeat the lines. And the lines are, you want to hear them?
Go.
I like chocolate ice cream. Chocolate ice cream is my favorite. I eat it every day. Whoopee.
Or something like that. So I still have the 5-year-old's voice. I've kept the 5-year-old's in my head.
When you were a 5-year-old, did you change your voice at all to that voice?
To this voice? No. It was the head voice. And that was it.
Yeah.
So there was really, at 5 years of age, there was nothing else I wanted to do. I never wanted to be a fireman. I never wanted to be an astronaut. I'm afraid of heights anyway. I never wanted to be a doctor, faint at the sight of blood. So my friends were playing with toy fire engines and whatever. I was playing with toy microphones.
Wow.
Vocation, truly, vocation. Nothing, never even ever considered doing anything else.
Never once. So it's been, what, 5 popes you personally?
There's a lot of 5s in this story.
There's a lot of 5s, because you're 5 when you're,
50 years, 5 popes.
Yeah.
In numerology, 5 is the number of creativity, because 5 is associated with the 5 senses. And we use sight and sound and smell and touch and taste to interact with the world around us.
Wow.
And to engage with the world around us. So 5 has lots of symbolic references as well.
And in your personal life. Because 5 popes, that's... I don't know anyone else.
Well, it's kind of... So here's the test, you see. You want to go there, so can you name them? Working back,
I think I can.
This is excluding Pope Leo because he's brand new and he counts. But I haven't had the opportunity to work with him yet. Yeah. So otherwise that'll be 6 popes, and that'll mess everything up because then I have to start rethinking the symbolism of 6, don't I? But anyway,
you're gonna have to get a 6th sense.
Something of
the sort. There you are.
Well, you can tell me about that.
Well, it is interesting because let's see, it's Paul VI. And then it's Pope John Paul I.
It is blessed Pope
Blessed.
John
He's blessed.
Paul.
Yes. That I didn't know.
There you go. Thrilled to bits. Glad to be able to say that because he's underrated. He's forgotten.
He's fantastic.
He was the Pope for 33 days. And don't we love the significance of that number?
Yeah, exactly.
Who else was around for 33? In that case, it was years to do what needed to be done.
Yeah.
And you really have the feeling that Albino Luciani, which was what his name was, 33 days was all he needed.
I didn't know he was blessed.
And he's a blessed, yes.
Fantastic.
Yes,
wow.
on his way to sainthood, and I've no doubt that he will get there.
Wonderful. And then
it's
obviously,
easy.
it gets easier.
Because John Paul I opened the door that allowed
Saint Pope John Paul II.
To walk through and to be and to do everything that he was and everything that he did for 26 years, Charlotte.
Yeah.
The Pope of an entire generation.
Yeah, incredible. And then afterwards, Pope Benedict XVI.
Indeed.
And then Pope Francis.
Yes, indeed.
Wow.
Right. Don't ask me which was my favorite because people do ask that question. It's always embarrassing.
I would never ask what your favorite of the modern popes was. I think if anyone does favorites, they should go
all the way back.
All the way back.
There are a lot of them, 260 something.
67.
Right? Yeah, well, there you go.
It's almost as if we cover popes here.
Yes. Is that what this podcast is about?
I think, but I'm not entirely sure.
A Pope podcast, and do we have to be careful that we don't pop the microphone?
Oh my gosh. But it is incredible because not a lot of people, I think, would have stayed in one field for that long. Even let alone everything that comes along with working for the Vatican and the high stress that is working in media as a whole.
Well, people when they're trying to be nasty to me, they'll say to me, you worked with 5 popes.
Yeah.
How is it that you're still Catholic? and the answer is, that's why I'm still Catholic. Yeah. Because having worked with 5 extraordinary men who represented different moments in my own life.
Right.
I was a baby, I was a kid, I was innocent and naive and dumb when I started, trust me, when I started working with Pope St. Paul VI back in the 1970s, and then I grew up with the papacy.
Wow.
So learning from them, being with them, listening to them, watching them, observing them, each one of them taught me something very different.
Wow.
Ask me.
Well,
what did they teach?
I was going to ask you, Sean.
That was on the
was on the prompters. Yeah. What did they teach you?
What did they teach? Well, that's a brilliant question, Charlotte. I'm delighted to be able to answer that question. Where shall we start? Shall we start where you started?
I think chronological order
chronologically
is nice.
in terms of 5. So it's the 1970s.
Yeah.
Popes are, Pope Paul VI,
right.
who was Pope for 15 years, by the way. And for those who are not church historians, it's always good Catholics need a little nudge sometimes,
right.
just a reminder. So Paul VI is the one who had to close the Second Vatican Council.
Right.
I didn't work with him, but I remembered Pope John the 23rd, who had this grand idea of opening the windows and allowing the Holy Spirit to blow through. Right. But then it was Paul VI who had the job of closing those windows and trying to resettle things after the Spirit had blown away and caused, quite a bit of hustle and bustle in the church as a result. 15 years, yes. Paul VI taught me the dignity of the papacy, Charlotte. He was a pope who was still being carried around on something called a sedia gestatoria.
Right.
Now, it's not a rude word. You can say it to your grandmother. A sedia gestatoria in Latin means it's literally the chair from which you gesticulate.
Right.
That sounds rude, actually.
That I wouldn't say to my grandmother.
We can cut this in post.
Forget this.
It's the chair, literally carried around on a throne.
Yeah.
Now, for us in the 21st century and for millennials and so forth, it sounds bizarre.
Yeah.
It's the Pope who's the emperor almost,
right.
being carried around on a throne
by people.
Well, yes, they're called sediari, the men who carry the chair.
And is that an honor?
Oh, very much so.
I would imagine.
In the old days, you had to be of noble birth. You had to be an aristocrat.
Really?
You're carrying the Holy Father.
Yeah.
So the dignity of the Pope is someone you would literally look up to.
Right.
A Pope who used to wear gloves because he couldn't touch or be touched.
Wow.
A Pope whose entrance into St. Peter's Basilica would be announced by silver trumpets. Now, of course, there are nostalgic people who think that that's lovely, and why don't we bring that back?
Yeah.
But I don't really think that's what. But
well,
certainly,
and we've run out of nobility to carry people with.
And that's true too.
Yeah.
That is, yes. So the dignity of the papacy. And then John Paul I comes along and he says, no gloves, no throne, no trumpets. And he brings everything down to earth. He's the first pope I touched, the first pope I hugged.
Wow.
And so he taught me the humility and the humanity of the papacy. The idea that here's a pope you can hug, a pope who would address us no longer as sons and daughters, but as brothers and sisters.
Right.
A pope who dared refer to God not only as our Father, but as our Mother, causing a scandal. It was 1978.
Wow.
How would the Holy Father dare? And I remember the exact words because I had to translate it from the Latin. And he said, we have been used to referring to God as our Father, but God is also and equally our Mother insofar as he loves us with the unconditional love of a mother. Now, how beautiful is that?
Beautiful. But that's so interesting that was in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And that's still happening. I mean, we have this today. It's a pretty modern issue, the amount of people saying, oh, it's horrible that you consider God to be masculine in many ways. But how interesting.
Or ascribing God a gender in any way. It gives male, female, she, he, it, whatever. Yeah. But the idea that God can be both, that God is both, and that God is characterized by unconditional love. And if there are any parents out there, and I don't mean to diminish anyone who's not a parent, but just
cool.
The idea of unconditional love. It is a love that is so overwhelming. There is nothing your child can do that will take that love away. They can be the worst blackguard in the world. They can do the most awful things. You may not agree with what they have done.
That happened 50 years ago almost?
Yes. And was considered so scandalous that particular phrase was removed from the Pope's discourse.
Really?
Because it was thought that it would cause such difficulty and theological issues and so on and so forth. But then, of course, popes since then have repeated it.
Yeah.
So we sort of shrug and whatever, what's new. But in 1978, it was huge.
Wow. And then did anything else happen like that when it came to the popes that followed?
Well, then we get to John Paul II, and that starts becoming familiar because he's the Pope of your parents' generation. They grew up with
I got the tail end.
You got the tail end of John Paul II.
Not to reveal my age.
I was,
not to reveal my age.
He died in 2005. I joke and say he taught me geography. Because we travelled such a lot.
Yeah.
We really did. I mean, he was the pilgrim pope. If you recall, going back to Paul VI was the first pope ever to fly on an airplane.
Yeah.
No pope. John the 23rd had travelled by train from the Vatican to Loreto and back.
And was that considered?
And that was considered revolutionary.
Really?
But Paul VI was the first pope ever to fly in a plane.
Okay.
And flew to the United States. He went to New York, one stop. New York. He addressed the United Nations in New York, spoke in French, and his message was the universal message of popes, always and everywhere, including Leo.
Yeah, peace.
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 He's je n'ai plus la guerre, never again war never again. Yeah. Traveling all around, so literally going to places you wouldn't know what the country was until you were there. But in terms of what he taught me, John Paul II taught me the power of gesture. He was an actor, remember. He understood. He had this the resonance of his voice, the power of his voice. I remember we were in Sicily when he chastised the mafia. And if you find that recording, it actually gives you goosebumps because he goes totally off script, and he threatens the mafia in Sicily, basically telling them that if they do not convert, they will go to hell. But he says it with the resonance, with the voice that only an actor could bring forth. And the power of gesture, the idea of visiting a country, coming down the steps of the plane, and then falling to your knees and kissing the ground. And he did that for as long as he could. And when he couldn't, when we were still taking him around the world because he wanted to travel, and he was in a wheelchair, they would bring a basket of earth to him, and he would still kiss the ground. The power of gesture, often theatrical, but very symbolic and extremely universal, because that's what gesture is. Huh? It goes beyond cultures and geography.
Wow, he cared that much, even when he was in a wheelchair.
Yes. The reverence, and he was a poet too. He wrote poetry. They're gorgeous books of poetry written by Karol Wojtyła when he was still Karol Wojtyła, and then later even when he was John Paul II. Beautiful poetry, so this reverence for the earth. Few people remember, people who are visiting St. Peter's Basilica. We have so many pilgrims coming to visit his tomb still in the Basilica today. They forget that the tomb where he's laid in the upper basilica today was not his choice. In his last will and testament, he requested to be laid in Mother Earth. And he calls her, they're all the connections, no? He calls her Mother Earth. He wishes to be laid in Mother Earth. And he was buried in the crypt, which is beneath St. Peter's Basilica, beside the tomb of Paul VI, who also wanted to be laid in the earth. No monumental tomb, but go back to the earth from whence we came. There's something very poetic and very beautiful.
Right.
But then, of course, when we made him a saint, we dug him up and brought him upstairs because we felt it was.
When you're a saint, all of your wishes out the window.
You see, not if you're a pope do people care.
Yeah. Pope St. John Paul II has a nice, comparatively, that's not that bad. Just being in a nicer tomb instead of being in the earth.
Instead of being downstairs. Yes.
Yeah, you could have an arm and who knows?
Well, since we're going chronologically, after John Paul II, we have Pope Benedict XVI. And guess where Pope Benedict XVI is buried?
I don't know. I don't know where Pope Benedict XVI is.
For $50 million.
And I'm not going to get it.
Benedict XVI.
I'll guess, but I think I'm way off. I don't know. He's in the earth.
He's buried in the same place where John Paul II was buried.
Oh, yes.
In the earth. Yeah. In the same tomb beside Paul VI.
Wow.
Talk about continuity and connections.
Absolutely. Wow.
Extraordinary. Yeah?
That was his wish also.
And that was his wish. Yeah. And when he was old and dying, there was a lot of speculation about whether he wanted a big fancy monumental tomb in St. Peter's And little did we know, he had already decided he too wished to be buried in the earth, and not only, but in the place where his predecessor. Isn't that beautiful?
So beautiful.
I think that's so lovely. It's like a family crypt.
Absolutely.
Idea.
And also I think that a lot of people have an idea of Benedict as being a very monumental in symbolism pope. A pope who, when he stepped out, when he was elected, he brought out the furs, brought out the silk. But at the end of his life to just say, no.
Utter simplicity. Go back to the beginnings.
Yeah, yeah.
So what did he teach me?
Yeah.
He taught me how to listen, Charlotte. Because Benedict was a theologian, he was a philosopher, he was an academic. I remember having tea with him one afternoon when he was still the prefect of the congregation. The microphone is off and I'm with the cardinal, and so, Your Eminence, how is the Holy Father doing? And he says, not very well. And you say, and what are your intentions when he does die? What do you think you're going to do? And he says, well, I'm looking forward. He said to me, I'm looking forward to going back to teaching my students at university. And it was a few weeks later, and he was on that balcony as Benedict the 16th. So when people say also, he knew it was coming, he wanted it. No, he didn't. He was an academic. He would always, his happiest moments were when he was with other academics. He blossomed when he was with academics. But he was difficult. You had to listen. You had to listen very carefully, and sometimes more than once, to get the drift of what he was saying. And then once you did, it was, oh my goodness, this is so beautiful. This is so inspiring.
Wow.
So yes, the art of listening, Benedict.
Wow, incredible. And then Francis.
Pope Francis, I miss him, can I say that?
Yeah, absolutely. We all do.
I do. Pope Francis, from the very first moment when he stepped out on that balcony, with that buonasera, with that requesting the blessing of the people of Rome. Francis taught me the power of touch. In a world where we're afraid to touch, where I work in an institute which is dedicated to safeguarding. It's about not just protection, but preventing abuse of all kinds, and not just with children, but with all vulnerable persons. And central to the idea of safeguarding is the concept of touch. Before I take your hand, I need to ask your permission. You do not initiate a hug. You wait for the other to make the first step towards you. There's all this great sensitivity that we have towards touch, and almost a fear now, because we've become so indoctrinated by the idea of abuse or potential abuse, that it's almost, oh my goodness, my instinct is to come towards you, is to embrace you, is to engage, but the holding back. And here was Francis, who never held back, and it didn't matter who you were. The pictures of him with physically disabled people and with intellectually challenged people, and did you ever see what he used to do with pregnant women? So you see a woman, you have an audience, and a pregnant woman will come up to him for this was in the early days when he was not in a wheelchair and so on and so forth, obviously. Right. She's got this big tummy. And he would place both hands over the tummy, and he would bless the baby in the womb. And then but there was something so dynamic, so human, so real, so immediate, so spontaneous about this celebration of life inside the womb, through the touch, through the engagement. And of course, usually the woman would cry and so forth. But it was always a beautiful moment. So yes, that was Francis. It's the gift of touch.
I think that a lot of people didn't know him personally, and so the loss of the Pope was a lot more about symbolism. It was it wasn't as immediate as personal. And so it's interesting, even thinking about Pope Leo now, that you've lost a friend and Pope Leo has lost a friend. That this was a man who was very kind. This was yes, he was a pope, but he was also a person and a friend to a lot of people. And I think it's, stories like this because I think at his core, that's what he wanted. I think he really loved being friends with people. He loved friendship and he loved talking and we do all miss him, obviously. So it's always amazing.
Well, the story is told that when he was elected and they took him up to the papal palace here in the Vatican and said, Holy Father, this will be your residence now as Pope. And he looked around these marble halls and said, I won't be staying here. And they said, but Holy Father, and they said, may we ask why not? And he's reputed to have said, and I quote, because I'm sick. And the people who were accompanying him were terrified because they thought, oh my goodness, we've just elected a pope who's terminally ill. What have we done? And he said, no. I have a people sickness. I have to be with other people. And that was why he chose to be in Santa Marta. It wasn't sort of some extraordinary act of humility. Right. Oh my goodness me, I don't want the papal palace. I'm so very humble, as Mr. Micawber, you remember in Charles Dickens, I'm so very, very humble. It wasn't about that. I need to be with people. Yeah. When I get up in the morning and go down to breakfast, I need to see friendly faces. I don't like eating by myself. Yeah. And so, yes, I think you're absolutely right. There was this passion for people, for company, for relationships. Yeah. Relationship. And Leo is following in those footsteps. I mean, those words, building bridges. Yeah. Building bridges, creating relationships, consolidating relationships. And I love that because that's one of his titles. He is Pontifex Maximus. Right. And you'll remember your Latin, of course. Yeah.
No, please don't quiz me on that.
Fine. So Maximus is the max, the bestest.
Yes, that part's easy.
He's the biggest, the bestest of pontifexing, which is building. That's Ponte is bridge, building bridges. That's what he is. That's what he does.
Yeah, which is so interesting because I think over the past few weeks since I've arrived and since everything has happened, amidst the chaos, amidst all the madness, time and time again, I think we just saw his friends. We saw Francis's friends over and over in little ways, even interviewing them or talking with them. They felt so close. And that's true about faith and about life as a whole, that friendship really comes down. It's one of the most integral things. So it is so interesting, though. I think you would identify, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you identify storytelling as one of those forms of communication that develops friendship, that it's such an integral aspect of our lives, and that if we don't continue it in an honest way, we lose something. But what do we lose?
Well, my name is Seàn-Patrick, and in our Irish tradition, there is the storytelling tradition is very much part of what it means to be Irish. Ireland is a very tiny island and it rains a lot. And the food is, well, if you like boiled potatoes, then we lived in small houses. Right. I remember this is in even as late as the 1960s. I vividly remember visiting a town in Galway, which is on the western coast, going through this town, and there was one town store, the town shop. You have that in the Midwest and the United States. You have the local store, which sold literally everything, from foodstuffs to buttons to... But outside the store, there were 3 coffins. Large, middle, and small. Also, I mean, when I say everything from diapers to coffins, from diapers to death. So you lived in small houses and basically a rural, not wealthy, at least when I was growing up, it was not. It was before the Green Tiger and before all the major tech companies were investing and so on and so forth. It was a poor country. And so you played music, you listened to the radio, and you told stories. And so the idea of storytelling, it's about relaying traditions and experiences, and usually with a glass of Guinness in front of you and a roaring fire. We should have a fireplace.
We should have had a fire. That's my apologies. What do you think when you write down a story versus speaking it out loud? Do you think there's an intimate difference between those two things?
Oh yeah. Well, we're coming back to radio again. You see, you lose the tone of voice. Right. You lose all the wonderful, the lilting. You lose the accents. So when I was very young, way back in the galaxy, far, far away in a land,
unspecified.
I worked with the BBC for a short time. And well, people ask me about my accent because it's not an Irish accent and it's not an Italian accent. And so what is it? It was an accent that was forced on me because back then, if you worked for the BBC, you had to have what was known a flat accent. No one could know where you came from because it wasn't about you. You would never announce yourself on the air. You would never say, as we just did, hello, I'm Seàn-Patrick Lovett, and I'm Charlotte Twitton. Well, you're Charlotte Twitton, I'm Seàn-Patrick, whatever.
Both of us are Pete.
We're both Pete,
yeah,
yes.
there it is.
You would never announce yourself because you were the voice of the institution.
Right.
And so everybody had to speak the same way. Nowadays, you can't get a job on the BBC if you don't have a regional accent.
Wow.
Because people have to be able to identify with you. So storytelling, oral storytelling, the accent tells me where you come from. It tells me what your origins are. Before you actually add any content, I already know whether you come from the north or the south or the east or the west. And so I can place you, I can identify with you. And what about the smile?
Right.
You cannot communicate a smile in writing, can you? Unless you put a little emoji there.
Right. Well, emojis change everything.
They do.
In a horrible way.
Well, no, not necessarily. So I also teach university, and when we lived through the whole COVID horror of teaching online, and when my students came back into in-person classes, I would say something silly, as we Irish often do, and I would get no response. It was like they had lost the ability to interpret my tone of voice. So I went home and I made a series of emojis.
Oh.
And every time I would say something silly, I would lift an emoji, smiling emoji, sad emoji, silly emoji, whatever, and they would react. And I understood it was because they'd been subject to words being mediated on a text for so long. They'd lost the capacity to interpret nuance.
Right.
And so it's the nuance that comes through the oral storytelling that gets lost on the printed page.
It's true, because I think they said that also a lot of kids had trouble reading facial expressions who had been raised in the COVID period, didn't they? There's huge news stories that sort of... Yeah, well, that was smart. They should have implemented the emoji. That probably would have worked.
There you go. Yes,
well.
I should have copyrighted that.
Yeah, well, let's not release that then.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll cut that too. We're doing a lot of editing on this piece. Next
Nicholas,
question.
Least favorite you're not going to do.
Not?
You're not going to do?
Borgia, Alexander VI, horrible man, all those children. No. Bad.
Good choice for the least favorite. Underrated saint.
The spontaneous answer, my mother, but I mean, everybody out there is going to say the same thing,
I'll
right?
take it.
Yes.
I think it's fantastic.
But this is a serious podcast. And so, Joseph of Cupertino.
Lovely.
Ask me why.
Why?
Joseph Cupertino, lots of people know him because he is the patron saint of aircraft designers and pilots and so forth, because the tradition is, don't look at me like that, you know this. Joseph Cupertino is famous because he's said to have levitated while celebrating Mass.
Yeah.
That's the... Yes.
I didn't know he was patron saint of flying.
Of pilots and...
But that makes sense.
Because he levitated.
Yeah.
What very few people know, Charlotte, and the reason why I like him and think he's underrated and people do not know, is because a lot of his behavior, apart from the levitating, leads us to believe that he was on the autism spectrum of people with autism.
Wow.
And in an age where we talk a lot about mental health and where we're struggling even to define what autism means, we have a patron saint for people with autism, and he's Joseph of Cupertino.
No, it's 3 more. Favorite fact about the Vatican that you're allowed to tell me?
No, basta.
You can't tell me anything. That's right, you worked there for too long. Most Catholic country, in your opinion?
Philippines. I teach in the Philippines. 97% of the population, that's a statistic, claims to be practicing Catholic. They have, on a Sunday, they have 7 masses. The first mass starts at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's called the Misa del Gallo, the mass of it's at cockcrow. Yeah. It's the rooster. It's the mass of the rooster, because the rooster starts crowing at 3 o'clock in the morning because the sun comes up very, very early and it's very, very humid and hot.
Yeah.
And so people get up early in the morning, go to the first mass at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's the Philippines.
Okay, finish this sentence. For Pete's sake, I wish people would understand.
I wish people would understand why you invited me here in the first place.
Wonderful. I think they did.
Right.
Well, thank you for joining us, Seàn, for our first episode here. And thank you all for joining us. If you enjoyed learning about the Vatican, please tune in for next week. We'll be discussing human happiness. But this has been For Pete's Sake. And thank you again, Seàn.
Yes, for Pete's sake, be happy.